What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here from Darium's Competitive Pokemon. Going to be doing a future format deck today. This is going to be for the Ultra Prism set when it gets released, breakthrough through Ultra Prism. I am super excited to introduce Dusk Mane Necrozma GX Magnezone. Now, I just did my Dusk Mane Necrozma GX card of the day video, and I was getting a lot of flack for not including this as an acceleration option for Dusk Mane Necrozma, and to be honest, I just forgot. So I'm sorry to everybody. I'm actually super excited about this Magnezone because you guys know how much I loved Pikachu Magnezone, Pikachu EX Magnezone, and this deck is just like Pikachu Magnezone, except like way better and like actually good. I am really excited about this list. I was able to construct with my friend Natalie. I was able to construct what I consider to be a very good, first draft list for this deck, considering how much work I put into Pikachu Magnezone. Building this deck in standard format was very easy. Kind of just came very naturally. Was able to figure out the counts very easily, very efficiently, and this deck seems to work wonders already. I mean, you are going to be firing off big attacks after big attacks with this Dusk Mane Necrozma, no problem. This thing is an absolute beast. So I'm going to be pulling up some of the translations so that I can read them to you as I'm going through this. You can see that this list is proxied out. The set does not drop until February. Pre-releases don't start until this upcoming weekend. So I do not have my hands on these cards. I am just using proxied versions. So shout out to Natalie, who was able to get these nice color print jobs for you guys. But anyways, this deck seems like it could be a real contender in standard format. Dusk Mane Necrozma just has this awesome attack. It's translated as Meteor Tempest, can do 220 damage. With your Magnezone in play, you can accelerate as many metal energy into the field as you like per turn. So very cool. Even the Magnemites are usable and just have this like sweet ability that prevents bench damage so you don't get overrun quickly by jet punches and things like that from opposing Buzzwole. We played this deck in 2 best-of-3 series against my Buzzwole list from Memphis, and it actually went 1-1. So like this deck won a series against it, and then Buzzwole won a series against it. So at the very least, it could go toe-to-toe with some of the best decks that standard format has to offer, and I fully expect this deck to just be able to completely decimate most Zoroark-based decks that are in standard format right now, since Zoroark will have no way to deal with some of these huge hit point Pokemon. 190 hit points on Dusk Mane Necrozma, 160 hit points on the Solgaleo Prism. This thing is insane too, by the way. Definitely going to be picking up these Solgaleo Prisms. But anyways, I've rambled long enough. Let's get down to the list. The list starts out with 3 Dusk Mane Necrozma GX, 1 Solgaleo Prism, who is probably my favorite card in the deck, 3 copies of Magnezone from Ultra Prism, 3 copies of Magnemite from Ultra Prism, and we've got 2 Octillery, 2 Ion Pool Remoraid, and 2 copies of Tapu Lele. And that's it for the Pokemon. And part of what I love about this list is that it's just so simple. What could go wrong? You only have a stage 2 Pokemon. You only have to set up 1. Unlike the Metagross GX version, which I was talking about in my original review of this card, which would need to set up 2 or 3 stage 2 Pokemon, this deck, much like Vikavolt Tapu Bulu, only needs to set up 1 stage 2 Pokemon. Then you could just let the energy just rain into play, which is totally amazing. As soon as you get this Magnezone up, you could just start grinding through your deck, finding those metal energies, and throwing them on your main attacker, Dusk Mane Necrozma GX. Dusk Mane Necrozma GX is a total beast. This thing's got 190 hit points, so it just has that upper level hit point total for Pokemon GX that exists. There's no Pokemon GX, no super playable Pokemon GX basic that has more than that. I mean, of course, there are Wailord and your Wishy-Washy, which, yes, they have more than that, and your Guzzlord GX all have more hit points than this, But, these are your playable Pokemon GX. We are talking about that upper, that upper tier hit point with 190 being just outside that, traditional 170, 180 range, which we've come to expect from most basic Pokemon EX and GX. So awesome, 190 hit points, plenty of hit points to work with, and 3 incredible attacks. First attack for 3 colorless energy is going to be Claw Slash, and believe it or not, you end up using Claw Slash quite a bit because you will start Dusk Mane Necrozma pretty often, and then, turn 2, you might only be able to get 3 energy on a Dusk Mane Necrozma, or you might only want to put 3 energy on a Dusk Mane Necrozma and knock out your opponent's active Pokemon. May it be a Remoraid, or maybe a Rockruff, or maybe it's a Beldum, or maybe it's a Ralts, and you just want to poke something small, or like an Alolan Vulpix, right? Or even a Magnemite. You just want to knock that Pokemon out on the second turn of the game. Once you get your Magnezone into play, you're going to be going for that Claw Slash. So it's a great utility attack just to knock out or poke little things without discarding all of your energy. And then if you are able to Claw Slash a little Pokemon like Remoraid or Magnemite, then you have 3 energy on your Dusk Mane Necrozma ready to go for the following turn for a big Meteor Tempest. Meteor Tempest is the second attack, does 220 damage, and costs 4 metal energy. So this is why we need Magnezone in the deck in order to accelerate all this energy onto your Dusk Mane Necrozma GX. For 4 energy, 3 metal, 1 colorless, does 220 damage, and you have to discard 3 energy attached to it. So that's no problem when you have Magnezone in play, because you discard the energy. We play Mount Cornet to be able to get that energy back, Professor's Letter to find more energy, accelerate them back to your Dusk Mane Necrozma, and pull off another Meteor Tempest. So this deck can very easily fire off Meteor Tempest after Meteor Tempest once it gets set up and rolling. Finally, that GX attack, Eclipse Sun GX, is actually extremely useful. I can't tell you how many times this GX attack got used in my games with this deck just last night. Eclipse Sun GX, you use it all the time. It only costs 3 energy, it does 250 damage, so you're knocking out anything that you might be worried about in standard format with this Eclipse Sun GX. You use it if you're behind on prizes, which against many decks, you're going to drop behind a prize or two early just while you get set up and get your energy flowing. Then once you get your energy flowing, there's almost no stopping this thing. So once you get set up, you might only be behind by a prize, but you can get 3 energy onto a Dusk Mane Necrozma, then GX your opponent. And the problem with that is, for your opponent anyways, is once you have GX'd your opponent, you have 3 energy in play, you've probably taken 2 prizes by GXing them. Now, if your opponent has the option to knock out Magnezone, it doesn't even save them from an incoming Meteor Tempest, because you have 3 energy on the Dusk Mane Necrozma, and then you GX them. Then, if they decide they want to knock out your Magnezone, all you have to do is manually attach 1 energy. You have 4, then you can Meteor Tempest the following turn. It's just a great flow of attacks there, going from your GX attack to a Meteor Tempest for just 1 energy the following turn. It's very aggressive, very intimidating to play against. Dusk Mane Necrozma is an incredible card and an incredible main attacker for this deck. But this Solgaleo Prism is the star of the show. This thing is incredible. Every GX deck wants a valid non-EX attacker, non-GX attacker. This guy fulfills that role perfectly. Not only do you have a 4 energy attack, which does 160 damage, it's just like Knuckle Impact. The text says that you cannot attack next turn, so you have to Guzma or something like that in order to use this attack turn after turn, or you can just retreat it and attack with somebody else on the following turn. But with Choice Band, you're hitting that 190 hit point level, which is great for an attack. The name of this attack, looking up the translation real quick, it's translated as Corona Impact. I wonder if it'll keep that translation in English when we get those scans revealed this upcoming week, but we'll see. For now, it's Corona Impact, 160 damage. This Pokemon can attack during your next turn, but 190 with Choice Band is perfect numbers to knock out opposing Dusk Mane Necrozmas, to knock out Pokemon like Buzzwole GX, to knock out anything with 190 hit points or less. Tapu Bulu, there's a lot of Pokemon GX that can get knocked out, by this Corona Impact. So an incredible attack, a non-EX attacker, non-GX attacker, and it's got 160 hit points. Tell you what, this thing is a pain to play against. I mean, even if you wanted to, you could play Fighting Fury Belts in this deck. I'm choosing to play Choice Bands right now just to fix your math so that you could do 250 damage with this and 190 damage with this. But if you were to play Fighting Fury Belts, you could give this thing 200 hit points, which is totally insane. Right now, I'm opting to play Choice Band though, which I think just gives you some better options as far as hitting some certain numbers with your Pokemon, most notably 250 with your Dusk Mane Necrozma GX and 190 with this guy. And not to mention, this thing has an amazing first attack. Rising Star, that 1 energy attack here, says for each Pokemon your opponent has in play, attach a metal energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like. That is amazing. Your opponent is always going to be having at least 3 or 4 Pokemon in play. Very rarely do they just have 1 or 2. And if they have a full bench, they have 6 Pokemon in play, meaning that for 1 energy, you get to accelerate 6 metal energy from the discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like. That is incredible. That means even if you get your Magnezone knocked out, you still have an option in this deck to accelerate energy without abilities, without any sort of setup, just with a basic Pokemon to accelerate energy onto your Dusk Mane Necrozmas, onto itself. And that is incredible because even under Garbotoxin, Garbolock, which would be a horrible thing for this deck to deal with without this Solgaleo Prism, you can still accelerate under Garbotoxin. And that is really why this card just makes this whole deck a valid deck. This thing not only gives you a non-EX, non-GX attacker, it also counters Garbotoxin. It also saves you when your Metagross or when your Magnezone has been knocked out. This thing is the star of the show. You can only play 1 in your deck, but to be honest, I mean, one is plenty. This card is so strong, so completely busted that this thing really runs the whole show here. As soon as you see it, you're going to want to slap it down. The fact that it's only 1 prize means that the opponent is going to be conflicted about knocking it out. They don't want to have to put forth the effort to do 160 damage to this thing. So this thing kind of gets to run rampant and avoid getting knocked out because nobody wants to knock it out, but it's so good that you have to knock it out. It's just this conflicting situation you put your opponent into, having to deal with this Solgaleo Prism. The thing is so good, and that first attack, Rising Star, really bails you out of a lot of bad situations. We play a 2/2 Octillery line in this deck. I was playing the same thing in my Pikachu Magnezone deck, and that's just because as soon as you get end late in the game, you cannot afford to not draw your energy. All of your attacks, except for this Solgaleo Prism here, your Dusk Mane Necrozma GXs do require that you discard your energy when you attack, so you need Octillery's Abyssal Hand to continue to draw into energy to put onto your Pokemon late in the game. So Abyssal Hand helps you get set up early, helps you draw late game out of N, and just helps fill the gaps. I mean, this thing makes the deck so much more aggressive. You're going to be drawing into just seeing way more energy cards with an Octillery engine in your deck than you would see otherwise. So I would not play this deck without Octillery. Sets up very easily. I wouldn't worry too much about playing both a stage 2 and a stage 1. This is all very easy to set up, and you can see how few Pokemon are needed in here. We don't need any tech attackers. These things are sufficient enough. Even if you're playing against a fire deck, you just try to go toe-to-toe and trade with them as you can. You're going to have a non-EX guy to throw in there that can knock out any sort of Volcanions or Turtonator GXs or anything like that. You have even Tapu Lele can go ahead and just energy drive with a ton of energy on it and a Choice Band, knock out a Volcanion as well. You have options to deal with that. This deck is just so simple, and I love that about it, and it is very consistent. I love a 2/2 Octillery line just to help draw into those energy late in the game. Now, the 3/3 Magnezone line, 303. At first, we had a Magneton in here, but we had to find some room for some Professor's Letters just to help juice that energy and get it going early on, especially since we are also playing Skyla in this deck. Skyla is kind of taking a play out of Vika Bulu's, book. They are playing multiple copies of Skyla, not a lot of Sycamores. We may be a little bit supporter heavy on this list right now, and with time we will be able to see, what kind of supporters you can cut, and where you can like thin the deck up in order to make it draw a little bit more aggressively. But right now, this is just the most consistent list we could come up with, and a 303 Magnezone line works out totally fine. We have a rescue stretcher in order to get these pieces back into play should you have to discard any, and that should work totally fine here. Now, Magnezone only has a retreat cost of 2, Magnemite only has a retreat cost of 1, Mount Coronet, simply enough, gets you 2 energy back from the discard pile. So we're not playing any Floatstone or switching cards other than just Guzma in this list, and that has worked out totally fine as well. Since this thing only has a retreat cost of 2, that is very easy to pay just by accelerating Metal Energy onto it or Guzmaing it out of the active position like that. And with Octillery, you can easily play Guzma and draw cards to get energy into play on the same turn. Magnezone has an awesome 150 hit points. That's just a great amount of hit points for Stage 2 Pokemon, support Pokemon like this to have, making it just a little bit difficult for the opponent to knock out easily. This Magnemite is incredible with that ability which prevents any sort of damage from attacks so long as this thing is on the bench, so it can't be two-shot by a Jet Punch on the bench. Love that. That makes this thing much more stable to set up against a Buzzwole deck, and I do really enjoy Magnemite's ability there, so very good. Having a retreat cost of 1 and a resistance to Psychic is very good too for Magnemite. Just helps with its survivability, and I love the whole deck's resistance to Psychic is very good too, since Garbodor is not exactly a great matchup, but like I said, you can use that Solgaleo Prism and continue to accelerate energy against these Garbodor decks anyhow, so you may be able to pull some tricks out with that Solgaleo Prism. Now, Magnezone is primarily here for that ability that you're going to be using. Let's see, the translation is Magnetic Circuit. So the same ability as your Lightning Magnezone from earlier. Magnetic Circuit. As often as you like during your turn before you attack, you may attach a Metal Energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon. Very cool ability there. Also has a usable attack, 130 damage, and the same kind of clause that Solgaleo Prism has. It can attack during your next turn, so you're going to be using that as kind of a one-of attack. But most of the time, you're not going to be putting your Magnezones in danger and attacking with Magnezone. There's almost no reason to do that unless you have to. But if you have to, 130 damage, nothing to scoff at. Can definitely knock out some non-EX, non-GX Pokemon. There are a lot of non-EX, non-GX Pokemon with less than 130 hit points, so it can definitely get in there and be useful. And with the Skylas in the deck, I have found that using a 303 Magnezone line is consistent enough, especially with the Octilleries, to be able to get your Magnezone into play, stabilize your board position, and then just continue to draw into the cards you need in order to take 6 prizes. To finish things off with the Pokemon, we do have 2 copies of Tapu Lele GX. When I was talking with Natalie, she originally wanted a 3rd copy. Now, some players may opt to play a 3rd copy, but my rationale here is that you only need 2 just because you have a 2-2 Octillery line. So usually you are not going to have the bench space for a 3rd Tapu Lele GX. I don't really think that's necessary. I think 2 is probably fine. You'll see we play a ton of supporters in this deck, so you don't really need to have that 3rd Tapu Lele in order to get your supporters. We have a ton of supporters in here. If you were to play a 3rd Tapu Lele GX, we would probably just be doing that in order to increase the consistency of your turn 1 Bridget, but I think for now, 2 has been working fine for me, so that's what we got. Let's go ahead and move on to the supporters. I said we play a lot of them, and we do. Got 4 copies of Professor Sycamore in here, 4 copies of N, 3 copies of Skyla, 2 copies of Bridget, and 3 copies of Guzma. Now, this is a pretty hefty amount of supporters. A lot of Vikavolt decks were trimming down on the number of Professor Sycamore that they were playing because they don't want to discard cards. This is very different. Now, with Mount Coronet in this deck, you do want to discard your energy so that you can Mount Coronet them back into play. So Professor Sycamore is very good in this deck, especially with that Prism, with the Solgaleo Prism. You want to be able to draw aggressively, ditch energy aggressively so that you can use use this to accelerate energy when you want to. So 4 Professor Sycamore is a must. You may be saying, Andrew, didn't Cynthia come out in this set? Doesn't Cynthia have a place in here? When we were originally talking about this list, we were thinking about Cynthia, but why would you play a Cynthia? There's really no reason to. We were thinking, why not 1 Cynthia? Why not 2 Cynthia? But why any Cynthia at all? I think cutting any copies of N for Cynthia is just doesn't really have a point in here, since we do play a hefty 2/2 Octillery line. There's really no point in Cynthia. You want to be able to disrupt your opponent and then continue to fill your hand with Abyssal Hand later in the game. So 4 copies of N made the cut over any copies of Cynthia. If you wanted to play Cynthia, you would cut into your N count, but you want to be able to disrupt your opponent, and Cynthia doesn't allow you to do that. Also, N plays into Octillery much better than Cynthia does, because late in the game, you're going to end both you and your opponent to 1 or 2 cards. Then you can draw out of your N with Octillery, and maybe your opponent can't if they are not playing Zork or Octillery or something like that. So N is just much better as a disruption card, and also just pairs with Octillery much better. So I'm not running any Cynthia in here, and I don't think it's very much needed. We are playing 3 copies of Skyla just to increase the consistency of being able to get your Magnezone into play to go grab those rare candies and complete that combination. You can also Skyla for a Mount Coronet in order to get 2 energy back into play. You can also Skyla for a Professor's Letter. We play a couple copies of Professor's Letter in order to juice your Necrozma, your Dusk Mane Necrozma. So if you have Mount Coronet in play, that's 2 energy. You could Skyla for Professor's Letter, get 2 more, and then you have a Meteor Tempest right there. So Skyla really helps complete a lot of the card combinations that we need in order to, pull off big attacks in this deck. So that's why we play 3 copies of Skyla. We also play 2 copies of Bridget. We could play a third if we wanted to, but I feel like 2 is fine with 2 Lele's. You see it enough to be able to set up. You don't necessarily lose or anything if you don't get the turn 1 Bridget in this deck. However, you probably want to see it. So you could play a third Bridget, but Bridget really just, it clogs this deck up. With Octillery, you're really clogging the deck up with more copies of Bridget. You could play the third Lele, but I feel like you see it enough with the 4 Ultra Ball, the 2 Bridget, and the 2 Lele. That's 8 outs to a turn 1 Bridget, which is pretty good. I mean, all things considered, it's pretty good for your turn 1. So 8 outs, I'm okay with that. You could play a 9th, but at the end of the day, I feel like 8 works just fine. And this deck can still win even if you get a turn 2 Bridget. Like, that is totally fine as well, because you're going to be taking big knockouts just turn after turn as soon as you get Magnezone into play. 3 copies of Guzma is just great as our switching card. We do not run any float stones or anything like that. So Guzma is your switch card of choice. Also, you want to be able to target down whatever sort of threat your opponent is building up on their side of the field with a big Meteor Tempest. So this allows you to do that. Now, this deck could use a free retreater. I have found that sometimes you want to just Guzma and promote a free retreater, come back and just Meteor Tempest your opponent's threat that they may have. So we don't have any free retreaters right now. That is a little bit of a bummer. A lot of times you find yourself having to retreat the Lele for 1 in order to pull off a Guzma play. But I could see playing a Mew from Fates Collide in here. Mew from Fates Collide could be really cool because it can allow you to reuse your Solgaleo. It can allow you to copy the attacks of your Dusk Mane Necrozma. Imagine Mew using Meteor Tempest, or imagine Mew using your GX attack, or imagine Mew copying your Prism Pokemon and accelerating energy. There's a lot of very cool uses for the Mew. Mew can also one-shot a Buzzwole by copying this guy's attack if you wanted it to. Could copy this guy's attack without a choice band, so it has that little niche as well. So Mew definitely could make the cut in here. Mew would make it so that you have that free retreat as well for your Guzma plays, so I really think Mew could go well in here, but our original draft does not have it. That's just something to keep, in mind as a potential option for this deck. That's it for the supporters. Moving on to the item cards, we have 4 copies of Ultra Ball, 4 copies of Rare Candy, 2 Choice Band, 2 Professor's Letter, 1 Rescue Stretcher, and 4 Mount Cornet. I love the simplicity of this deck. Like I've said before, I think this thing is just consistent. There are no real, flares or tricks. This deck just works. I mean, it's awesome. It just works, does exactly what it's supposed to do, and I love that about it. Now, upon first glance, you might be like, Andrew, Mahone, what in the world are you doing? There's no field blower in here. Did you forget? No, I didn't forget. We were looking to try and just build the most functional list we could. Garbodor is not that big of a threat in standard format. And, I mean, what sort of things do you need to remove with your field blower? You've got 4 stadiums, so you don't need to remove stadiums with your field blower. You don't need to remove Fighting Fury Belt with your field blower because your Meteor Tempest knocks out everything. Worried about using field blower for would be to remove tools from Garbotoxin. And then I would ask you, okay, does 1 field blower fix your Garbotoxin matchup? Probably not. You're probably still going to have problems. Does 2 field blowers fix your Garbotoxin matchup? Might be a little bit closer, but probably still be a little bit sketchy. Now, I would just say, why don't you just go gung-ho and use your Solgaleo Prism, try to load up a couple Dusk Mane Necrozmas while limiting your amount of item usage, and try to just win the game that way. That's how I would go about the Garbodor matchup if I was playing it with this deck. As you know, my Pikachu Magnezone list did not play any field blowers as well. I was just saying, like, hey, you try to get as many energy into play turn 2 as you can and hope for the best. This list actually has more of an answer to Garbodor than that, in that Solgaleo Prism. So I really don't think that field blower is totally needed in here. You could play 1, you could play 2. I wouldn't knock you for it. I mean, totally reasonable if you wanted to, but like I said, you don't need to remove Fighting Fury Belts. You already do 250 damage, which is more than anybody needs to do. We have 4 Mount Coronet, so we have plenty of counter stadiums, and Garbotoxin is the only thing you're worried about, and it's not that big of a deal in standard format, and you can always use the Solgaleo Prism to counter that. So that's my logic there. Moving on to the items that we do have. 4 Ultra Ball, obviously great for getting the most out of your Abyssal hands, for setting up, grabbing your Magnezone, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, we can't play anything like Heavy Ball in here. I mean, we could. Heavy Ball would grab both your Solgaleo and it would grab your Dusk Mane Necrozma, but I can't see playing Heavy Ball in here since it does not grab your Magnezone. It's only got a retreat cost of 2, so I think the 4 Ultra Ball is probably just the way to go. We also play 4 copies of Rare Candy just because getting that Magnezone into play is what makes the whole deck run. You cannot not set up Magnezone. You have to set up Magnezone. So 4 copies of Rare Candy is going to help you do that as consistently as possible, especially with those 3 copies of Skyla. Putting together that card combination is going to be very easy. We played 2 copies of Choice Band. Our original list had 3 copies of Choice Band, but we've decided that 2 is probably fine because what do you really need to do 250 damage for? Choice Band on the Dusk Mane Necrozma gets you to 250. Gardevoir GX is a popular Pokemon that has 230 hit points, but you already OHKO Gardevoir because of weakness. Decidueye is really one of the few decks that you would need Choice Band for, so you could attach Choice Band, knock out a Decidueye. You could also knock out an opposing, Metagross GX, Solgaleo GX, things like that. Choice Band, though you do need it, you don't need it in that many situations. If you wanted to knock out, a Turtonator with the Fighting Fury Belt on it, any sort of 190 hit point Pokemon with a Fighting Fury Belt on it, we don't play Field Blower, so yes, you need the Choice Band for that. But those scenarios, I feel like, are few and far between. You do have your GX attack, which does 250 damage. Most of the time, your Choice Bands are going to be used on this Solgaleo Prism, and you could Skyla for it. So that was our rationale in cutting to 2 Choice Band. It just wasn't getting as much mileage as I would have liked with 3 copies, so I feel like 2 copies is probably okay, just since you do so much damage anyway. 220 is enough to knock out most things. You have 1 250 attack you can pull off, and 160 does knock out a fair amount of things as well. So we do have the option to Choice Band, but I don't feel like we need 3 of them in this list right now. We also play 2 copies of Professor's Letter. Professor's Letter just makes the inclusion of Skyla so much better, so that Skyla is not a dead card in your hand when you're abyssaling and you need some energy. You could draw into Mount Coronet and Skyla, and that's 4 energy right there. You could grab 2 out of your deck, you grab 2 out of your discard pile, and it gives you just like a nice even distribution. I feel like you could play energy retrievals here, but sometimes you have trouble getting 4 energy into play in the first place. Professor's Letter really helps thin the deck and juice your energy, gets it into play as early as possible. So I really like the 2 inclusions of Professor's Letter here. I feel like they work hand in hand with Mount Coronet. Mount Coronet is the whole reason that this deck is playable. This thing is amazing. Once during each player's turn, they can search their discard pile for 2 metal energies and put them into their hand. This helps you perform those big attacks with Dusk Mane Necrozma turn after turn. You're going to be Meteor Tempesting, using your Mount Coronet, grabbing the metal energy back from your discard pile, maybe draw into another one with Missile Hand. That's 3 more energy, and you got another Meteor Tempest. So this stadium really helps the whole deck run. It's a problem when your opponent counters your stadium, so we play 4 just to make sure that you always have access to this thing. Really love Mount Coronet in here. Really helps the whole deck function a lot. Then we've got our 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher. Since we are playing a Professor Sycamore heavy list, you could play a Super Rod, but I like the kind of immediacy of the Rescue Stretcher. I feel like it's just much more consistent as far as getting your Metagrosses, not your Metagrosses, your Magnezones into play and things like that. Rescue Stretcher can also bring back a Dusk Mane Necrozma, since we only play 3 of those. If you happen to prize one and need a third or something like that, you can Rescue Stretcher it back into play very easily. So that's it for the item cards. Then we do have 11 copies of Metal Energy, which I feel like has just been a good number right off the bat. I do really like 11 in here. My testing with the Magnezone Pikachu deck, I felt like this was very close. 10, 11 was about what we needed. I feel like 11 here is very good. It allows you to draw into some naturally from your hand while also keeping some in the discard pile. This deck is very energy hungry. You want to be able to set up 2 fully powered Dusk Mane Necrozmas if you needed to, especially by using that Solgaleo Prism. If you happen to be ability locked or something like that, you want to be able to draw into plenty of energy to be able to accelerate into play. So that's it for this deck. 11 metal energy. Let me know what you guys think of this Magnezone Dusk Mane Necrozma deck in the comments below. I am super excited about this deck. Going to be getting some gameplay footage up of this deck this week as well, so I'm really excited about that. Also, just going to be shouting out my Twitter in videos from now on as well, just to try and kind of build that community online on Twitter. That's the best way to contact me. If anybody's got questions about Pokemon, things like that, that's where I do most of my communicating. So go ahead, check me out on Twitter at enjoyfriend, ENJOI friend. I talk about Pokemon news and trading card game stuff on there, competitive play, things like that on my Twitter account. So that's the best place to reach me if you want to tweet at me, have questions, things like that. So thank you all for watching the video. Let me know what you think of this deck in the comments below. Make sure to like the video, sub to the channel. Peace.